Good evening and welcome to the first installment of my new show, Asylum for the Politically Incorrect. As you know, our nation is in chaos right now due to the riots that are taking place all across the country. Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement have gained some new momentum this week as they engage in acts of violence and destruction in our cities. Their excuses for their actions are that they're protesting police brutality by being extremely brutal themselves, fighting for civil rights even though they burn black-owned businesses and beat black people on the streets if they have the wrong political views, and of course, protesting the death of George Floyd. Now, I want to make something very clear. There is a distinct difference between peaceful protesters and rioters. The peaceful protesters march without violence, simply wanting the men responsible for George Floyd's death to be brought to justice, which thankfully they have. They are being charged with murder 2 now. They were previously being charged with murder 3, but they have since upped the charges, which they definitely deserve. The looters and rioters, however, they don't care at all about justice. Some will claim to. Some will shout out, "Black Lives Matter," or "Justice for Floyd" at the top of their lungs as they flee a ransacked Target with the television tucked under their arm. Now let's talk about the details of the event that started this whole thing. The details that the mainstream media wants to leave out. First of all, George Floyd was not an innocent black man who found himself the target of a racist cop. There's no evidence to suggest that Derek Chauvin, the cop that arrested him, was in fact racist. Floyd was a convicted felon and a career criminal. He spent 5 years in prison for holding up and mugging a pregnant woman inside her own home and beating her in the back of the head with his pistol when they left, leaving her unconscious, an act that is known as pistol whipping. That is the act of a thug, alright? If you hold a pregnant woman up in her own home and threaten to shoot her and her unborn child, you are a thug, alright? That is an inexcusable act. And he spent 5 years in prison for it, which he definitely deserved. Now, could he have changed in that time? Of course, it's certainly possible. I believe it is. People have changed. I mean, a person can go from being a cold-blooded killer to being a minister. It's happened. However, there is evidence to suggest that Floyd did not change all that much. The reason he was arrested on a fateful day was because he was trying to pass off a counterfeit bill. When the cops found it, they tried to arrest him. He resisted arrest, which led to him being pinned on the ground and ultimately led to his death. During his autopsy report, they discovered that he had high levels of methamphetamine in his system. He was high. Let's count that off. Counterfeit money, resisting arrest. He was high on meth at the time. George Floyd was not an innocent bystander who was the victim of a hate crime. He was a criminal still. But that does not excuse the fact that he was killed in a terrible way. He did not deserve to die at all. The cop that arrested him, the cop that killed him, was negligent and derelict in his duty and deserves to spend his life in prison. Nobody's debating that. That is inexcusable what he did. Now, President Donald Trump himself actually wrote a tribute speech to George Floyd, speaking of how unjust his death is. It's a very good speech, very, very well written. If there are two things President Trump can do, it's exaggerate and write a pretty inspiring speech. Links in the description below. I really recommend you go watch it. Now, here is where the left's hypocrisy and double standards come into play. I'm going to read you a short list of names, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Here they are: David Dorn, Patrick Underwood, Max Brewer, and Chris Beatty. These are only 4 of the many hundreds of people who have been brutally beaten, injured, and sometimes murdered on the streets during these protests. Patrick Underwood was a federal officer who was shot in the head. Chris Beatty was a basketball player who was shot in the head. David Dorn was a retired police officer who was shot in the head. David Dorn's case particularly jumped out at me because he spotted a man running out of a store with a television, tried to stop him. The man shot him in the head. David Dorn was murdered over a $200 piece of technology. That is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Max Brewer was a cop who was run over with an ATV. Thankfully, he survived and he is making a recovery. Thank God, that was so lucky. Not that he was run over, that he is still alive. So, what do they all have in common? They're all cops? Well, no, not all of them. Chris Beatty wasn't a cop. So what could it be? Oh, They were all black. No, that's interesting, isn't it? They were all black. So why didn't their lives matter? George Floyd dies of manslaughter. The cop accidentally kills him. Whole nation goes in uproar. 4 black men are murdered, or at least 3 of them are. The nation stays silent. So why is that? Why is the media so silent about their deaths? I mean, they're black. Black lives matter, don't they? Well, maybe not their lives. Maybe they're the wrong kind of black. I don't know. All I know is just George Floyd, the man that killed George Floyd, definitely should go to prison. I 100% want justice for George Floyd. But I want justice more for Max Brewer, David Dorn, and Patrick Underwood. They were brutally murdered. Senseless. These people were targeted and killed by Antifa. All right? George Floyd's death was an accident. These men's death, murder. Flat out murder. Inexcusable. I would much rather be protesting them than George Floyd. Of course, George Floyd's death does deserve protests. I'm not saying he doesn't. So, I'll leave you with that. Some food for thought. Think it over. Thank you for thank you for watching my video. If you like it, please, push the like button. And please leave your comments and thoughts down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And till next time, stay safe.